The first time Sarah Chen saw him, he was on his knees in the parking garage. Not fixing a car, not tying his shoe, but taping a torn action figure back together for a little girl who dropped it near the elevator bank. He didn't notice the black SUV idling behind him. He didn't notice the woman in the back seat, watching through tinted glass, running 11 minutes late for the most important board meeting of her career. He just kept talking to that little girl in a soft, patient voice, like nothing else in the world mattered more than fixing her toy. Sarah told her driver to wait. She didn't know his name yet. She didn't know he worked 2 floors below her office, in maintenance, wearing a gray jumpsuit with Mike, stitched crookedly over the pocket, like it had been sewn on by someone learning to use a needle for the first time. She didn't know that in 6 months, this quiet man, with grease under his fingernails, would turn her entire understanding of power, love, and money completely upside down. All she knew, in that moment, sitting in the back of a car worth more than most people's houses, was that she couldn't stop watching him. Sarah Chen was 34 years old and the CEO of Ashford Technologies, a company she'd built from a garage startup into a $4 billion empire in 11 brutal years. She'd fired executives twice her age without blinking. She'd once ended a merger over lunch because the other CEO called her sweetheart during negotiations. Men in expensive suits feared her name in boardrooms across 3 continents. And yet, here she was, frozen in the back of her own car, watching a janitor tape a plastic superhero's arm back onto its body. "Ma'am," her driver said carefully, "we really do need to go." "1 more minute," she whispered. The little girl hugged the janitor's leg, said something Sarah couldn't hear through the glass, and ran off toward the elevator where a tired-looking woman, probably her mother, was waiting with visible relief. The man in the gray jumpsuit stood up, brushed off his knees, and went back to mopping a spill near the loading dock like nothing had happened. Like kindness was just something he did, not something he performed. Sarah had spent 11 years surrounded by men who performed, men who complimented her ambition to her face and called her cold behind her back, men who dated her, or tried to, because dating the CEO of Ashford Technologies looked good on a resume of conquests. She'd learned to read flattery, the way other people read weather patterns, always bracing for the storm, hiding behind the sunshine. But this man hadn't performed for anyone. He didn't even know she was watching. That night, unable to sleep, she pulled up the employee directory on her laptop, feeling faintly ridiculous, like a teenager stalking a crush through a yearbook. It took longer than it should have. Maintenance staff weren't exactly featured prominently in the corporate database. Eventually, she found him. Michael Torres, 36 years old, hired 14 months ago, employee record clean, performance reviews average, nothing remarkable. Nothing that explained why she couldn't stop thinking about the way he'd knelt on that concrete floor like the world could wait. She almost closed the laptop, almost told herself this was absurd, that she was the CEO of a company with 9,000 employees, and she did not develop crushes on the maintenance staff based on 30 seconds of parking garage footage that existed only in her memory. Instead, she found herself in the break room on the 3rd floor, 2 days later, at exactly the time the maintenance schedule said he'd be cleaning that wing. "You missed a spot," she said, nodding toward a perfectly clean counter, because apparently that was the best opening line her billion-dollar brain could produce. Mike looked up, startled, then smiled. The kind of smile that reached his eyes without trying to. "Did I? Or are you just messing with the new guy?" "Little of both," Sarah admitted. He didn't recognize her. That was the first surprising thing. Sarah Chen's face had been on the cover of Forbes, Fortune, and Bloomberg Businessweek. Her keynote speeches had over 10 million views combined, and this man was looking at her like she was just another employee grabbing coffee. Maybe someone from accounting. Maybe someone new in HR. "I'm Sarah," she said, testing something Some small experiment in anonymity she didn't fully understand herself. "Mike," he said, wiping his hand on his jumpsuit before offering it. "Sorry. Probably shouldn't shake with this hand. I've been cleaning bathrooms all morning." She shook it anyway. His grip was firm, calloused, real. They talked for 11 minutes. Later she would remember the exact number, because she'd glanced at her watch once and felt a genuine flicker of surprise that 11 minutes had passed without her checking it obsessively, the way she did in every meeting, every negotiation, every dinner with men who wanted something from her. Mike talked about his daughter, Lily, 6 years old, the same little girl from the parking garage. He talked about how his wife had passed away 3 years ago, breast cancer, fast and cruel, and how he'd left a decent engineering job in Ohio because he couldn't stand the house they'd shared anymore, every room haunted by a version of life that no longer existed. "So, now I clean floors in California," he said, with a self-deprecating shrug that held no bitterness in it at all. "And I pick up my kid from school at 3:15 every day. And honestly, ma'am, that's a pretty good life." "Sarah," she corrected softly. "Not ma'am. Sarah," he repeated, and something in the way he said her name made her chest tighten in a way she hadn't felt in years. She came back the next week, and the week after that. She told herself it was research. Some kind of grounding exercise. A CEO reconnecting with the real employees, who kept the building running while she signed contracts worth more than some countries' GDP. But by the 4th week, she wasn't fooling anyone, least of all herself. The problem, of course, was that she still hadn't told him who she was. It started as an accident of circumstance. Mike had assumed, reasonably, that a woman drinking break-room coffee in business-casual clothes worked somewhere in the building's administrative offices, maybe mid-level management, maybe HR. Sarah never explicitly lied. She simply never corrected him, and the longer the silence stretched, the heavier it became. Until lying by omission felt indistinguishable from lying outright. She told herself she'd explain everything once things felt more solid. Once she was sure this wasn't some fluke, some fascination that would burn out. The moment reality intruded, she told herself Mike deserved to fall for her, Sarah. Not for the CEO, not for the $4 billion, not for the private jet, or the penthouse, or the magazine covers. She wanted, for the first time in 11 years, to be loved for exactly nothing at all, except who she actually was underneath the title. It was a beautiful, reckless, deeply flawed plan. And like most beautiful, reckless, deeply flawed plans, it was destined to explode. The explosion came at the worst possible moment, the way these things always do. Ashford Technologies was hosting its annual shareholders' gala, an obscene display of wealth held in the grand ballroom of the company's headquarters, complete with a live orchestra, ice sculptures shaped like the company logo, and enough champagne to fill a swimming pool. Sarah had to attend, obviously. She was the CEO. Her face would be on every screen, her name in every toast. What she hadn't planned on was Mike being there too, part of the maintenance crew assigned to keep the ballroom running smoothly behind the scenes, restocking supplies, managing the coat check. Invisible labor, holding up a visible spectacle. She saw him first, across the ballroom, in his gray uniform among the glittering tuxedos and gowns, and her stomach dropped straight through the marble floor. He saw her next, standing at the podium in a midnight blue gown that had cost more than his annual salary, being introduced by the board chairman as the visionary who built Ashford Technologies from nothing. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our CEO, Sarah Chen. The room erupted in applause. Sarah watched Mike's face from the stage, watched the exact moment understanding crashed into him like a wave against rock, watched confusion curdle into something far worse, something that looked disturbingly like betrayal. She tried to find him after her speech, He was gone before she made it off the stage, disappeared into the service corridor like smoke. For 3 days, he didn't come to the break room. For 3 days, Sarah sent no messages, made no calls, because what could she possibly say that wouldn't sound like exactly the kind of manipulation he now clearly believed it was? On the 4th day, she found him in the parking garage again, loading cleaning supplies into a cart, refusing to look at her even as she approached. "Mike," she said. "Miss Chen," he replied, and the formality landed like a slap. "Please don't call me that." "What should I call you then?" He finally turned, and his eyes weren't angry, which somehow made everything worse. They were tired, wounded. "Sarah, from HR? Because that's the woman I thought I was getting to know. Turns out, she doesn't exist." "I exist," Sarah said, her voice cracking despite 11 years of training herself, never to crack in front of anyone. I wanted you to know me before you knew that. Do you have any idea what that looks like from where I'm standing?" His voice stayed quiet, which was somehow more devastating than shouting would have been. "I lost my wife 3 years ago, Sarah. I moved across the country to give my daughter a fresh start. I clean toilets and mop floors, and I do it without complaining, because it's honest work and it pays for her school clothes. And then the CEO of the company I work for decides to play house with the janitor for a few weeks. Probably for fun, probably because it's novel, and I'm supposed to just be flattered? That's not what this was." "Then what was it?" He set down the box he was carrying, hard enough that the plastic bottles inside rattled. "Because from here, it looks like a billionaire got bored and found herself an interesting hobby." Those words hit Sarah harder than any hostile takeover, any boardroom betrayal, any headline calling her heartless ever had. Because underneath the anger, underneath the hurt, there was a truth she couldn't fully deny. She had approached him from a position of total power and near total anonymity, choosing exactly when and how much to reveal, while he'd had no choice at all in the matter. She'd controlled the entire narrative, and control, she realized with sick clarity, was its own kind of dishonesty. "You're right," she said finally. "I should have told you from the beginning. I was scared, Mike. I know that probably sounds insane coming from someone with my bank account, but I've spent 11 years wondering if anyone in my life actually likes me, or if they like what I can do for them. I wanted, just once, to know what it felt like to be chosen for nothing. That's not an excuse. It's just the truth." Mike was quiet for a long moment, long enough that Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs like it might give out entirely. "I need time," he finally said. "Not because I don't understand. I do understand, actually, more than you probably think. But understanding doesn't erase how it feels to find out the person you've been falling for has been performing a role this whole time, even if the reasons make sense." "I never performed with you," Sarah said quietly. "That's the one thing I need you to believe. Everything I said in that break room, everything I felt, that was real. The only lie was the silence about my job title. Everything else, every conversation, every laugh, that was just me." He nodded slowly, but he still walked away, and Sarah let him go, because forcing the issue would only prove every fear he had about powerful people who took what they wanted regardless of consequences. The weeks that followed were the loneliest of Sarah's professional life, which was saying something for a woman who'd eaten dinner alone in 5-star hotel rooms across 4 continents, more nights than she could count. She threw herself into work, closed a merger that made headlines, gave a speech at Stanford that trended on social media for 2 days. None of it filled the specific hollow ache that had opened up in her chest since the gala. Then, 6 weeks later, everything shifted again, in a way nobody saw coming. An internal audit, routine, and unremarkable on paper, flagged irregularities in the maintenance department's supply contracts, kickbacks and inflated invoices that had been quietly draining company resources for years. funneled through a shell company connected to the facility's director, a man named Gary Holt, who'd been with Ashford for over a decade and who happened to be Mike's direct supervisor. When the investigation team started interviewing maintenance staff, Mike gave a statement. Calm, factual, unflinching, that ultimately became the linchpin evidence that took the whole scheme down. Gary Holt, cornered and desperate, tried to strike back the only way he knew how. He went to a tabloid reporter with a story, twisted and half-true, claiming the CEO of Ashford Technologies was having a secret affair with a janitor, using company resources to fund a scandalous relationship, painting Mike as some kind of gold-digging opportunist who'd seduced his way into executive favor to save his own job. The story broke on a Tuesday morning. By noon, it was everywhere. Splashed across gossip sites with lurid headlines, Sarah's face and Mike's photograph side by side under words like scandal and cover-up. Sarah expected the board to panic. She expected calls, demanding damage control, statements distancing her from Mike entirely, maybe even pressure to fire him quietly and make the whole embarrassment disappear. What she didn't expect was Mike showing up at her office that same afternoon. Uninvited, still in his work uniform, his jaw set with a determination she hadn't seen from him before. "I know you probably want to handle this with lawyers and press statements," he said, standing in the doorway of the office he'd never once seen her occupy until that moment. "But I came to say something myself first, before this becomes about strategy instead of truth." "Mike, you don't have to." "I do, actually." He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "I've spent 6 weeks being angry at you for hiding who you were. And I still think you should have told me sooner. I meant that, and I still mean it. But watching this story explode today, watching people twist something real into something ugly and transactional, it made me realize something. The version of you they're printing in that garbage article, the calculating executive who uses people, that's not who I fell for. That's not who knelt beside me and asked about my daughter for 11 minutes, without once checking her phone. I was so busy being hurt by what you didn't tell me that I almost forgot everything you did show me." Sarah's eyes burned. "I never stopped wishing I'd told you the truth from the very first conversation." "I know," Mike said quietly. "I believe that now. It just took me some time, and a garbage tabloid story apparently, to remember why I believed it in the first place." The company's official statement went out that evening, addressing the financial fraud investigation directly and firmly denying the fabricated affair narrative. But Sarah added one line that wasn't in the lawyer's draft, one line she insisted on herself. "Michael Torres is a man of integrity who helped uncover wrongdoing at real professional risk to himself, and any attempt to smear his character is a continuation of the very corruption he helped expose." The tabloid story died within days, buried under the much bigger and much truer story of corporate fraud and Mike's quiet heroism in exposing it. Gary Holt was terminated and later indicted, and Mike offered a substantial promotion into facilities management as recognition for his role in the investigation, initially turned it down, uncomfortable with anything that might look like a reward tied to Sarah's influence. "Take it because you earned it," Sarah told him over coffee. Real coffee this time, in a real conversation where nothing was hidden. "Not because of me. Ask anyone on that investigation team. They'll tell you exactly why you got that promotion, and it has nothing to do with the CEO's feelings for you. He took the job. Slowly, carefully, they found their way back to each other too, not with grand romantic gestures or billionaire extravagance, but with small, honest things." Sarah started picking Lily up from school some afternoons, sitting in the parent pickup line in an ordinary sedan instead of the black SUV. Learning the names of Lily's friends, learning that 6-year-olds do not care even slightly how many companies you own. Later, at a much smaller gathering than the shareholders' gala, just family and a handful of close friends in Sarah's backyard. Mike got down on one knee, the same way he had that very first day in the parking garage, except this time he wasn't fixing a broken toy. He was holding a ring, and Lily was standing beside him, clutching a bouquet of dandelions she'd picked herself, because, she informed everyone very seriously, real flowers cost money, and Daddy said Sarah likes things that are real. Sarah said yes before he finished the question. Later, people would ask her, journalists mostly, curious about the fairy tale romance between the tech billionaire and the single father she'd fallen for. What exactly had made her risk everything? Her reputation, her carefully controlled public image, her entire understanding of how relationships were supposed to work in her world. For a man who cleaned floors for a... Sarah always gave the same answer. He never once tried to impress me. And that, more than anything else in this world, was exactly why I fell for him.